welcome to the Institute for Australian Chinese Arts and Culture at Western Sydney University. I'm Professor Tsan-Huang, the director of the Institute. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that we are sitting on the country of the Darug people of the Darug Nation, whose ancestors have been the traditional owners of their lands for thousands of years, and pay our respects to the First Nations elders, past, present, and emerging. Welcome to Music in Society webinar series and to today's webinar 3, which features a Dr. Tsan-Huang Tsai. And the English, the pinyin is a bit harder than Chinese actually. Dr. Tsai from the University of Adelaide, and he's going to talk about from private scholarly chambers to public treasure houses, the Chinese seven-strained zither and challenges of its representation in museums. Very interesting topic. And today we are very honored and privileged to have a special guest, Professor Yu Hui, to open the session. So let me briefly introduce Professor Yu. Professor Yu is the first musicologist inducted into Changjiang Scholar Distinguished Professor of the Chinese Ministry of Education and is a Donglu Distinguished Professor at Yunnan University and a Chair Professor at Xiamen University. Professor Yu received his PhD in ethnomusicologist from US in 2000, and he was on the Shanghai Conservatorium of Music faculty and was a visiting scholar at the University of British Columbia and Australian National University, ANU, in the 1990s. Over the past 2 decades, Professor Yu has also been the Dean of the College of Arts at Shenyang Normal University, Ningbo University, and Yunnan University. His publications include 18 books and numerous papers in Chinese, English, and Russian on topics of traditions of Chinese music theory, tuning and temperament systems, Chinese guqin and opera traditions, as well as interactions between music cultures in China and the West, with the most recent being the upcoming Oxford Handbook of Music in China and Chinese Diaspora. Professor Yu is a member of the European Academy of Science and Arts. Please welcome Professor Yu Hui to open the session.
Thank you, Professor Han. And I'm very honored to have this opportunity to host this webinar on the topic is music in society. And today, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Tsan-Huang. Let me put it in Chinese order. Dr. Tsan-Huang is actually a well-known, internationally well-known young scholar in Chinese music and ethnomusicology. And one of the unique things about Dr. Tsai that I didn't know any musicologist had this kind of experience. He worked in China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Australia, United States, you name it. Whenever there's a Chinese music research facility, he worked there. So his experience and his knowledge on Chinese music and on the, especially, I think his specialties on the Chinese guqin music, Chinese religious Buddhist music. I think his master's degree is about that. And Dr. Tsai's knowledge is very, very important for us to understand Chinese music worldwide, especially some of the issues, intercultural issues, and how Chinese music is populated and represented in other cultures. So I think I need to read Dr. Tsai's biography, and I think that is already in the website. And people can read that. But I think this is very important that we should understand that Dr. Tsai is a unique young scholar in this research field. And this topic about the guqin and the guqin's representation in the Western countries' museum is very important and very unique perspective on the Guqing's internationalization and how the Guqing culture is Guqing music, Guqing instrument, and Guqing culture are represented in both in China and in the West. And the comparison between different museums in Western countries is very unique perspective on the Chinese Guqing music, especially in contemporary settings. Because Dr. Tsai, I read the introduction about his lecture, especially in recent years, that we all know that Guqing becomes a surge in China as an ancient high culture and very popular in China. And I think Dr. Tsai's lecture today will give us a very important input to advance our understanding of how Guqing is represented in the Western cultures, especially in the Western museums. So I'm very expecting today's lecture will be valuable knowledge for us musicologists and for the average listeners, audience. So I don't think I should occupy too much time. So the floor is yours, Dr. Tsai.
First of all, thank you, Professor Yu Hui, for such wonderful and informative introduction. I met Professor Yu probably dating back to 20 years ago, so I still enjoy being called young, emerging scholars. You know, when you are getting older, being called a young guy is actually an honor. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking time to join us today. This is the part of the series Music in Society organized by Dr. Ning at Western Sydney University. And first of all, I would like to also thank the invitation from the director of the centers, Professor Tsan-Huang. I have met you on Zoom last year. It's great to be invited to be part of this interesting lecture series. And I also like to extend further thanks to Professor Yu to accept the invitation from Dr. Ng to be my discussant. And I'm delighted and honored to listen to your feedbacks and also questions later. Although we are not physically gathered together today, but the same, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge and pay my respect to Aboriginal peoples as Australia's first peoples and nations, and to recognize them as traditional owners and occupants of land and water in Australia, wherever we are physically in at the moment. This talk was coming out of personal reflection, research, and interpretation of my year-long fellowship at the Metropolitan Museum of Art between September 2018 and August 2019. I was so lucky to have this rare opportunity to spend a year studying Chinese musical instruments in the US as Andrew Mellon Fellows at the Met. I was honored having this rare chance to see world's most important and beautiful treasures from the angles limited to staff working at the Met, encountering countless oldest, rare, and expensive musical instruments of mankind. I was given also permission to play some of them for the purpose of my research. In my talk today, it's probably 30 minutes. I will specifically focus on the Chinese seven-string zither qing or guqing, and the way how the instrument is displayed at the Met. The qing has been an instrument collected and exhibited in galleries of musical instruments and of Asian arts in museums worldwide. Generally speaking, the qing is regarded as the most important Chinese instrument. It has the longest living musical traditions within our written history, and its 简字 notation which is a type of temperature notation dated back to 8th and the 9th century. It's the oldest complex and most oldest surviving number notations of humankind. The instruments themselves are the oldest existing performable musical objects maintained through successive generations. Many fine examples built between the 7th and 10th century could be found in the Palace Museum in Beijing, the National Palace Museum in Taipei, Shouso in Nara, and the Sackler Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. The instruments and its associated cultures has not only exist in several East Asian countries, such as in Japan and Korea, but also have had great impact on their regional musical cultures too. For example, the Japanese koto adapt terminologies from the Qings and make it a name for Japanese zither. Korean kamungo also use it for scholarly context, have been impact in terms of aesthetics and musical taste of scholars in Korea. Most specifically, the Qing has the closest connections of Chinese philosophies and cultures. It's frequently mentioned to the classic Chinese Confucius teachings, and dominant elites and bureaucrat circles in ancient time. Their leisure life throughout Chinese histories. The instruments serve as a pathway to enter a world of self-refinement and self-determination. Taoist and Buddhist followers also adapt the Qing and its culture as a meditative tool for self-cultivation and self-enlightenment. Its rich symbolic meanings, the extensive canons of surviving repertoires, the inheritable antique instruments, and huge volume of studies associated with elite class meant that it's now recognized as part of the Chinese or even the world's intangible cultural heritage of humanity. It's enjoying unprecedented popularities in contemporary China. In previous decades, you cannot have seen, as you now do, retro-style interior stores selling the instruments, extensive teaching of it across major cities in Asia, regular high-profile government-sponsored concerts and exhibitions, not to mention its appearance in Beijing Olympic opening ceremonies, and countless martial art films, as well as record-breaking sales of antique instruments in auction houses. To give you one example, a Ming Dynasty Qing I purchased when I was a university student cost around 18,000 Australian dollars in 1995. But a similar Ming Dynasty Qing was sold for almost 300,000 2 years ago. I'm going to show you how the Qing was used in martial art films that allowing characters, elite gentlemen, to communicate without having verbal communications. And this is the example from the film called Red Cliff.
姑娘，看小乔的样子，就好像自己得了个亲生儿子那样高兴。姑姐，现在战事紧急，是战是和还行。
子敬，今天大喜，不谈公事。
好，好。
先生既然懂音律，何不与我合奏一曲？
我只是略懂。
你懂， 你是深藏不露。
哎呀，如果二位真的能够合作，那真是一时瑜亮啊。
Okay, for the interest of time, we have to stop there. You encountering Qing repertoires of flowing waters and also a repertoire called Guangling's melody. And these two have its own meanings or pieces. And without talking to each other, these two elites, gentlemen, try to communicate, in fact, how their attitudes toward this particular meeting. It's very, very interesting. I have also recently started working on how the Qing has been features in martial arts cinemas since the 60s. Maybe in the future, Nick can invite me back to give another talk. Just let me move on to the topic today. The Chinese Qing zither is known in the world of musicology and musical instrument studies as hetero-chord half-two zither number 312.22 in Humberto-Sachs classification of musical instruments, which placed the Qing in the same family as Japanese koto and Chinese guzheng and se. This classification has been a major framework for displaying musical instruments in museums since the late 19th century, especially in Europe and USA. Music specialists regard the Qing as the representative specimen of Chinese musical cultures, whilst curators and collectors of East Asian arts regarded the Qing as one of few collectible Chinese musical instruments. Recently, the Qing has been included in various exhibitions in the US. Just to give you some examples, the Qing has been used to represent musical life of Chinese elite gentlemen. It's used to contextualize the complex soundscape and musical interactions of East Asia and Central Asia, and to demonstrate the intertwined relationship between music and art in China's ancient past. Taking the Met Yale collections of musical instruments, Museum of Fine Art in Boston, and Freer and Sackler Gallery as an example, the Qing has long-standing part of this institutional collections and display. These museums have hosted altogether 15 Qing, and 8 of them are considered as part of founding collections. Notable highlights include the Qing called Kumu Longying, which dated back to some time between Tang Dynasty and Northern Song Dynasty. According to the most authoritative scholars of field, Zheng Mingzhong, who work at the Palace Museum in Beijing, this Qing at the Freer is one of the only 18 surviving example of Tang Dynasty Qing, and is only one of its kind outside China. Another highly valuable Qing is Prince Lu, Qing named Zhonghe at the Met Museum, which dated back to 1634, and is the oldest out of fewer than 20 surviving examples of late Ming Dynasty royal instruments known to us. From the numbers inscribed on the surviving examples, we can estimate it, that at least 400 Qing were once produced by Prince Liu. Despite the imperial connections and the forged instruments that were claimed to belong to this set, the mass Prince Liu Qing has become extremely important, as it's now the standard instrument that is used as a reference in identifying the authenticity of others in questions. As far as the institutional is concerned, it's below doubt that Freer holds the most important collection of Qing outside China, in terms of their historical significance as well as their unique viralities. Nevertheless, it's the mass Qing collections that has far more visibilities, since the Qing has been exhibited in their galleries for more than 1 century. This has required continuously transformations and accumulating understanding of the instruments and its associated cultures in conjunction with the development of musical instrument studies. A Qing was one of original 276 instruments donated to the museum in 1889 by Mary Elizabeth Brown. But it was not until 1891 that visitors had opportunity to see the instruments, while another one came into the collection by 1903. According to the archival photographs taken in the first decades of 20th century, a Qing with the label CHIN, Scholarly Root, China, was displayed next to a guzheng. Based on geographies and typology, the Chinese display was situated next to the Japanese case and was divided into sections to host zithers on the right, percussion and wind in the middle section, and roots and ball instruments on the left. In 1914, all instruments were moved from second floor to the first floor, with a new arrangement for public viewing until 1933. Photographs taken in 1941 showed 2 Qings were exhibited. In the China case, the Qing was displayed under the third and above guzheng, while in a comparative case, a Qing was displayed alongside with string instruments from various parts of the globe. Despite efforts to increase number of musical instruments hosting public performances and recruiting a curator, musical instruments at the Mets were mostly absent from public viewing from 1933. They were, however, available for classes and scholars to study until 1950s. But then galleries were closed entirely and instruments were put into storage room. There was no permanent display of Asian instruments again until 1971. The grand opening of the permanent instrument galleries took place on November 17, 1971. Chinese instruments were displayed again, and the Qing was grouped together with another 2 types of zither below the trumpet and flutes on case number 33, marked and painted in red color. The recent renovations of musical instrument galleries opened in February 15, 2019, during my fellowship at the Met, marking the completion of Met 3 years transformation of the entire musical instrument galleries. 3 Qings has been selected and showcased. In Gallery 6A4, The Art of Music Through Time, the Prince Liu Qing is hanging in a case 1500 to 1700s musical instrument of high status, near the violin and the instrument called sitar, and between 19th century vases with dragon handles and a pair of Tibetan trumpet, tongchant. This atypical layout invites viewers to consider the Qing alongside with other artifacts of different cultures commissioned by members of their high social classes, comparing their material, craftsmanship, function, and symbol, and aesthetics and values. Besides their connections to the noble class, Qing dynasty scholars Zhang Dao wrote that the Prince Liu Qing were also used by the Ming Dynasty last Emperor Chongzhen as imperial gifts to his ministers. This is similar to the pair of Tibetan trumpets that, according to the text panels, were made by the Chinese, probably as an imperial gift to Tibet in Qing Dynasty. Compared with other objects nearby, the Qing does not appear to be beautiful or astonishing, but its lacquer and its cracks that could not be mixed by viewers. The dark lacquers that covered the whole instrument protect the wood from weather and wear and tears of handling and playing. It's indeed the reason why Qing, produced 1,000 years ago, can still survive and be played in the present day. A careful viewer would even notice the unique lacquer works applied to the instrument. It's called Ba Bao Hui, 8 type of treasure ashes. It's a type of rare lacquers mixed with steel horns and bits of gold, silver, pearls, jade, agate, coral, or shells. Apart from different quality of sound produced by different age of instruments, these lacquer cracks on the surface of Qing has become the most important way to distinguish between antique and newer instruments. In other words, newer instrument has no lacquer cracks unless have been reinforced artificially. According to information I gathered in the past 20 years of my fieldwork, after approximately 2 centuries, the lacquer forms specific patterns called duanwen. They are various identical lacquer patterns that also reflect the age of the instrument, such as snake belly, water, cow hair, ice crack, and plum blossom. The duanwen patterns, therefore, are not only a way to identify a long-term historical object, but also an aspect of instrument itself to be appreciated. Then the contrasting example shown in the next videos is the instrument called Kumu Longying, dragons whirling on wintering trees. It's the Qing collected by Freer and Sackler. The instrument said to date back to around 7th and 12th century. Please pay attention to the differences between duanwen patterns in the case of being big snake belly and the Prince Liu Qings that I have shown you earlier. So even from these patterns that you will be able to tell, an expert will be able to tell which instruments might date back to which particular historical period. Let's return to the Met. Not very far from this Prince Liu Qing I have just introduced, across the platform were the world's oldest piano made by Cristofari stands. Another Ming ancients is exhibited. The Qing was donated to the Met by ex-curators of Asian art departments, James Watt, in 2011, who recalled in my interview that the Qing has been made in Suzhou or nearby cities around Lake Taihu, then brought to Hong Kong with families before passing on to him. The Qing is placed on two cushions on top of a table positioned between the cavalcade and harpsichords and in front of painted Chinese vase. This arrangement creates multiple layers of dialogue and comparisons. Museum goers familiar with critical role of keyboard instruments in the West classical music could notice a similar role of Qing in China, while the choir values and intimacies of European cavalcades echo the similar musical aesthetics and taste of Qing and its player. This Qing dynasty jug is decorated with a painting of a woman playing the Qing on a table next to Taihu stone, Taihu Shi, in the garden. It illustrates the idealized social class of literality that players of the Qing belongs to, regardlessly their gender. The type of porous stone known to shown on the jug would have come from the area near Tai Lake, Taihu, where the Qing was made. So it's very, very interesting coincidence, and also the way how they try to bring these two together. The third Qings can be found in the galleries 6A1, mapping the art of music, a gallery dedicated to demonstrating the role of music has on its own culture and people, as well as interaction between musical cultures. The Qing has been mounted on the walls and positioned on the corners of a L-shaped case. Viewers see several ritual and imperial percussive instruments on the right-hand side, represent Chinese musical instruments of folk and elite tradition on the left-hand side, signifying the Qing's central role in China's history and musical life. A mirror behind the Qings allows visitors to see the carved inscription of the instruments, name, point, makers, signatures. This type of carved inscriptions is used to identify the possible life story of the instrument and its owner. It's not only attract true collectors, but also provide a possible channels for players to link musical sounds and visual imagery together. In other words, the Qing is not only a musical object, but also a visual treasure. The Korean case is placed next to the Chinese one. The arrangement creates a mirroring effect that showing how some Korean music was first introduced in China, but later developed into its own local regional style. On the far left of the Korean case, the instrument komungo is also mounted on the wall to demonstrate the influence from the Chinese Qing on its origin, musical taste, and scholarly identity. Near the Austro-Chinese garden core, another Ming Dynasty Qing is hanging on the wall in the gallery 218 with Ming Dynasty furnitures. This is how a Qing would be traditionally stored, hanging for playing, but also an object for display. If we compare the Qing at the Met with other in Yale, Boston Museum of Fine Arts, and also Sackler Gallery, the Prince Liu Qing is only one acquired directly by the museum, with a joint ownership between the Department of Musical Instruments and also Asian art. It's unquestionable that it's actually very valuable for research into authenticity of other Prince Liu Qing internal manufacturers details. The decision has made to keep the Prince Liu Qing at the Met as a playing musical instrument, opening the possibility to study the sound preference of Prince Liu of late Ming Dynasty, especially by comparing it with other surviving examples. And this is the sound of this instrument, and hopefully we can hear it. What makes the Met Qing specials among these institutions is that they have been shown in to the general public on and off for over a century. The changing display of Met instruments reveal that changing intellectual thinking and practical concerns of their curators. By examining the past, present catalog labels and display of the Chinese Qing, this presentation shows how the Met's approach to the Qing and its representations have moved away from a musical specimen of China to an elegant elite artifact of Asian art, embodying both audio and visual aesthetics. And from a geographical classificatory arrangement to a more cross-cultural or even intercultural display. How the Qing has been currently shown at the Met can be a model for others to learn. In many museums and exhibitions that I have visited, the instruments were often laid down in the middle of the case. If we consider its cultural practice, there is no better way to display the Qing by hanging it up on the wall after playing, or moving the head of instrument to cover the edge of the table while playing it, as shown at the Met Museum. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tsai. This is a very informative lecture. Anyway, no. So let's first, do we have any question from? Let's see if any question from our audience. Please input your questions or comments from the chat if you can, so then we can continue with a further dialogue and discussions. Anybody have any questions? So you can put on the chat.
Can I start to the question? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, I found it fascinating. I'm not a musician at all, but I really found fascinating that, as a professor, you said it is so informative, because now you go to a museum, you look at the things differently in a different light. That is really enlightening. my question is, I mean, I have many, but so one of the question is, because in the ancient time, because as you said, it's fascinating to know that this is the oldest surviving playing instrument. How do we know that when it was in ancient time, how it was played, how it was played back then? How can we be sure exactly the same that we play today? What things make us like can assure us that that is the case?
Yeah, first of all, we cannot 100% sure how it was played, especially the music that has existing repertoires. I'm not quite sure whether you remember at the beginning of my presentation. Now I'm bringing that particular notation. It's called 简字 notation. 简 means simplified, 字 means character. So what happened to one of these character, Chinese character-like notation? Professor Han, you know Chinese character, right? Can you tell me what is this one after qi yi, the section 1? Can you read the first character, what it means?
Not really.
Yes, good. That's the answer I need. So what happened is this character looks like a Chinese. You can divide it into upper and lower part. The upper one, you have zhong in the middle, yes. And also 7. Okay, and that means using left-hand side, 中指, index fingers touch 7 pitches mark. So it tell you how to operate left finger, and the right-hand finger is like a go, but underneath character being removed and put 1. That means first string of the 7th string, and go is the technique using fingers plot the string. So that character indicates how to operate both fingers. Okay, but the notation won't be able to tell you how long is this pitch, how long what is the rhythm, because it's very, very personal, and it's possible to interpret. It's a bit like Chinese literature. There's no quotation, there's no mark to indicate how you actually read a sentence. But a young kids will learn directly from imitating of what teachers have cited the poets or the literature. And gradually you learn how to phrases these ancient poets and literature without any marks to indicate the sentences. So it's very, very similar ideas that the notation here has been used as a kind of cultural musical transmission rather than the notation that Western concept notation mean note. Here, notation doesn't mean note. It tells you how to play roughly. So yes, we don't know exactly how this notation, how this music would be played in ancient time. But what we know is the oldest surviving repertoires dated back to Tang Dynasty. Again, 1,000 years ago, that's oldest than any type of notated music that we come across today. I hope I answered your question.
Oh, excellent question, excellent answer. It's incredible. But with this notation, follow-up question is, if you use this notation, if Professor Yu Hui use it, do you come up with the same performance? Would you read them differently or read the same?
I think how you operate your both fingers and how the pitch should be created is the same. But for how long that pitch should last, everybody would have different interpretation. It's similar like Chinese literature. You can actually say, you can actually cite Li Bai's poet, I don't know.
I know what you mean.
窗前,
yeah,
just 窗前,
yeah.
明月光.
Or
you can say 窗前明月光. So it's the same, but everybody has its own style of reciting, and the music is probably similar that way. And what makes it more interesting is these musical cultures often use it as kind of self-cultivation. So normally you don't have audiences. Even these famous pictures of Song Huizong, Ting Qing Tu. Song Huizong was one of the most cultural emperor in Song Dynasty China. Even when he played Qing, only 2 audiences, less than 2. So in other words, the performer has a lot of freedom to interpret this particular piece. It's not for ticket sale, it's not play for audiences, it's for yourself. You should play according to your mood as well.
That's excellent. Don't we wish we go back to the ancient times so we don't need to pay for tickets? I actually have another question. I don't see another person coming up with this question because clearly you can see the picture is always a gentleman who play. It's like a genteel class. So they playing as a high class. When did the females started playing?
Yeah, we have a Song Dynasty historical treaty called Qing History, Qing Shi, and in Qing Shi it actually mentioned Tsai-Huang's daughter who married Sima Xiangru, and there was a piece called Feng Qiu Huang, Phoenix asking love from Huang. Huang is probably male. So Sima Xiangru actually played this piece to indicate his love to the ladies who behind the curtains of looking at these famous scholars of Han Dynasty. Yeah, so we don't really know when, but we know in Tang Dynasty, in Han Dynasty treaty, it already indicates that female scholars have knowledge of Qing. And not mentioned about Qing Dynasty, for example, the Red Chamber, Hong Lou Meng. Jia Baoyu was and Lin Daiyu's love story. And Lin Daiyu played this Qing, and female played the Qing. And Jia Baoyu asked, "Oh, sister, are you reading the sutra from the heaven, Tian Shu? Because I can't understand this character." And Lin Daiyu, the lady, was very upset, and she said, how come Confucius followers has no knowledge of this notation? It's Qing notation. So we can actually see in Chinese histories and literatures, there are females players. It's not about male or female. It's actually about the opportunity of education. These high elites, royal families, their daughters have opportunity to study, and they are most likely to be able to play the instrument as well. I hope I answered your question.
Oh, excellent. Fascinating. I mean, each question leads to the next one. I think there is a question I will ask afterwards. So yeah, I think there is a Q&A person.
I saw there's one question on the chat,
yes,
asking me when the bridge were introduced. The instruments that you're referring to might be called guzheng, an instrument that very similar to koto, and they are movable bridges here. You can see on this picture, it's not super clear. And these bridges, according to Confucius treaties, this type of instrument already exists, but it's not directly linked to the Qing. For the Chinese 7-string Qing, when we call bridge, it's called yueshan. It's really on the right-hand side of the instrument where the string noted here. And this bridge has been there since 2,500 years ago. We have 10 strings Qing discovered from Zheng Houyi tomb. The monarchy of Yi is currently displayed in provincial museum of Hubei province. And that archaeological findings dated back to 1,500 years ago. So I don't know whether I answer your question, Claire. Thank you.
I have another question before someone else comes in. This is about position. It could be a dumb question. Is, you know, when paintings, there is a specific position you should hang, and if not, and that could be a disaster. You know, would that apply to Qing? Because I see, you know, in museums that they vertical or they are horizontal, but the vertical not always at the bottom, you know. So is there any dumb position that you can tell to say, oh, no, that's definitely not the position?
Yeah, okay. So for the instruments, if you turn this upside down, you see the head of the Qing, and let's use this one, maybe clear. You see the bottom one, it's actually represent the head, and you have the shoulder, and you also have the waist. So if you are using human body to imply the position of the Qing, it should be opposite, okay? So when I was at the museum, we tried to discuss how this particular instrument should be displayed. And the curators say, oh, we need to turn it upside down. And I say, no, there's a reason why we hang this way. Because the head part is actually heavier. Okay, so you hang on the wall with heavier on the bottom for the earth gravities that strain the instrument. So otherwise the wood could twist the shape. So there's a reason why it's hanging so-called upside down. So yes, we need to hang this way, upside down.
It's very good. Yeah, it's really fascinating. Just to see other people have questions. And I have one more question about the preservation, because they are oldest surviving. What's sort of the trick that make the instruments, you know, survive for so long?
Yep. It's actually, you know, you Professor, you say you are not expert, you know nothing about music, but all your questions are very, very important and very, very good. I introduced different lacquer works. So Chinese lacquers actually preserve the humility away from the instruments. So if every generation apply some lacquer works, that will protect the Qing from being damaging. And also, you probably heard of in Japanese culture, their kitchenware or tableware always use lacquers. It's also very good for our health. And all the Chinese furnitures apply these lacquers. And not only that, it become a very beautiful patterns after 200, 300 years. It become very, very beautiful way of appreciating instruments like this.
Would that apply to violin?
Violin use very, very thin lacquers. So if they constant play, the instruments, the wood, also very thin wood, could have broken. But the Qing is quite thick in comparison with other instruments like violin. And also the lacquer works is very, very thick. Otherwise, it won't be able to create these lacquer patterns after a few hundred years old. That's why, you know, the Qing can actually protect water. So let's say if I was playing when I was drinking and I kind of split on the instruments, you use the cloth to wipe it up, it's fine. The water won't get into the wood. So it's very, very thick. And traditionally, you have to apply 7 layers after it being dried, and again and again and again.
What about strings?
The string here, for example, is silk. And some players, modern players, use metal cord and twist with the narrows, and that's supposed to be more stable and louder. That type of string has been invented in the 50s and 60s because this instruments was pushed by the CCP to become kind of popular instruments, try to get rid of the elite and make it a kind of instrument that every generation, farmers, workers can appreciate. So that's when the metal core string has been invented. And in the 80s and 90s, we see a few revival of silk string, and nowadays those players, they see themselves more like a Chinese elite gentlemen, elite noblemen. They would use silk strings for self-performance. But for public concerts, many musicians are using metal core. It's more stable and also louder.
Oh, thank you. It's so fascinating. I think the Professor Yu has come back.
Oh, Nick saying
Or
He's having trouble with his video, I think.
maybe Nick, you can go on to the other two questions.
Yes,
I have two questions here. Thank you for the presentation. I'm interested to know whether you found that there was a differences playing of these old instruments and compare with new. Yes, they are different. The sound quality is quite different. Often that Qing players like old instruments, they would call this, they like that sort of, they call Tsang and To. Tsang and To are implying aging and lower frequency, emphasizing more lower frequency. And that's actually wood being extremely dry after so many 100 years. So yes, it's different. For any old instruments, whether violin, piano, it's the same. All instruments have some problems, like older people have some problem, maybe the leg have some problem, arm have problem, but they have something that younger people don't have it. The same for musical instrument. And for newly made instrument, as the makers will try to refine and make sure the timbres is equal, or whether lower range, higher range. But an instrument being used for centuries, that create uneven timbre. So that's quite normal. So it's very difficult to say which one is better, depending what you are looking for. If you like to have a pure sound, equal timbre, then newer instrument might give you that. But if you like that sort of unique timbre that can only produce through age of instruments, then older Qing would be the preference. Okay. Keith, good to see you here. We haven't seen each other for a long time. You mentioned that wine. Yeah, exactly. It's a bit like wine, but not. It's also kind of similar. Not all wine are good, right? But if you are aging well, if you are preserving well, a bottle of Pen4 can cost you a fortune. It's exactly the same as Guqing. Do very old instruments still sound? Yeah, I hope I answered your question through the metaphor of wine you have asked. Yeah, possible to play. When they were made, still, yeah, still possible to play. Yeah, again, it can be repaired. Some old instruments have cracks because how it's actually stored, and sometimes it has been neglected by generations. And thanks for this instrument being popular again. So people kind of, found some of these instruments from their family old collections and realized, the way they step the instrument on top of other things actually damage the instrument, but we can actually repair. But repairing instrument is another art. You may not be able to bring the best of the sound that used to be, but at least you can bring it back. And it's lacquer, wood, and you use a lot of lacquer works, you can fix it. But again, it's another arts of skills and craftsmanship. Okay, there's another question. Here display are mainly about just position Asian, European. Okay, you are asking, okay, are there, instance with connection with Central Asia, Middle East, and what? Okay, you're asking a very, very interesting questions. First of all, I need to bring you back to this plan because the talk is actually about Guqing. I couldn't introduce the Mets, how they actually divided their galleries. On the top here, you see it's mixed between musical culture around the world here. That's where you see how the Chinese Guqing was played, kind of displayed next to Western instrument here. Yes, in these galleries, there are some Middle Eastern and also Indian instruments were displayed, but most of the curator trend in organology or musical instrument studies specializing in Western musical instruments. It's very, very similar to Museum of Antiquities that we see most of curators are specializing in Western arts, but emergent curators or more and more curator and also Asian curators are involving in this industry. So here we actually see that curator designed the gallery, try to introduce the history of music. So before in 1970s, the Met display one large gallery represent Western musical culture, and another gallery represent rest of the world. So that display, that arrangement tell you we are European centric and we treat others, okay? But here we see they try to bring it together, represent human history of music. And this is an approach that is also getting more and more popular and important among music historians, looking at music from global historical perspective. So the Met curators try to represent that in these particular galleries. And on the right-hand side, the organs that is made in the US that actually represent how a European craftsmanship has found its own home in the New World. So this is American church organs that have been reinstalled and playable there in the balcony. On the bottom here, you see another gallery that actually kind of give you indication of Asia on the right, and then you have Europe, and then you have America and Africa. So it kind of represents the world map, and also featuring some sort of musical interaction instead of just talking about individual musical cultures. So here you have Silk Road. So this case bring together musical interaction through cultural, trade, religious exchange. So on the left-hand side and on the balcony, you see here it's a kind of installation work called fanfare. This one is quite fascinating that, you know, it could also be displayed in a Museum of Modern Art in New York or anywhere. It looks like installations artwork represent that sort of festive atmospheres that brass or trumpet type of instruments actually create. But again, that's not today's talk topic, so therefore I didn't include a very fantastic, beautiful picture of this particular case, maybe in the future. Professor Yu, I'm sure you have something for me, right?
Yes, actually, we probably don't have enough time. Actually, this is a very big topic, and Professor Han's question is very interesting. And actually, I'm writing an article regarding this issue because Qing is really not only music instrument in Chinese culture. It's really a culture object, artifact. And sometimes it does not. Like the Tao Yuanming, it's a very famous story that he hung a qing with a string in his idea that we don't need to listen to the music. As long as we look at the instrument, we have the sound in our mind, then that we enjoy it. So the question is, this is very interesting though. first of all, for Dr. Tsai, I'm wondering if the catalogues in those museums indicate how these instruments, especially those antique instruments, the acquisition of this instrument, is there any is anything like information how they got this instrument? Are those donated by a private person or get this from some other channels? This is very important because some of the instruments are very valuable for the country. Now the question is, we may not have enough time to discuss it, but I just want to say something that in my upcoming article about this, they also related to Dr. Han's question. That is, do we play the instrument the same? Dr. Tsai and I will play the music the same according to the same score, and also do we play the same as people 100 years ago the same? This is very important because one of the unique things for the Guqin is that this is a static tradition. It's not like other traditions. Some other tradition we really got lost. We don't know what music looks like the Yuan Qu or the Ming Chuan Qi or the opera music, oral tradition. Some of the oral tradition we really got lost. But Guqin is very different. It's the same. If we play from Tang Dan, basically we play the same. We play each note. We play use exact same way. The only difference, like Dr. Tsai said, is the duration of each note. The rhythm is different, but the how to produce each note are exactly the same. The reason for that is Guqin has a very unique notation system. We call it tablature. And the oldest tablet existing right now in Japan, we call it's a wenzi, which means the basically written language. It's in one sentence describe which note how to play it. It's very long. In the Tang Dan, someone can Cao Ru, they invented this 简字 notation. So we now each note, one character, indicate one note. So this is very important. So in the future, people just follow this tablet. You cannot innovate a different thing. And also, this is very important. The Guqin is always static, and there's not encouraged. Invention or creativity are not very encouraged in the modern time. So everybody play the ancient tablet. So the tradition is well preserved. This is a very unique situation. And also, I'm talking about article I'm writing, and the reason for this is because you know that in ancient time, not every Chinese can read, so a lot of people illiterate. So which means put the music, Guqin instrument and Guqin music to a special privileged social classes. And those also, this is very important. Also, the other thing is I read the Jinyu Qinshe's Da Fuqi's article. Guqin is used by people like a nationalism weapon in the 1930s, because they think Guqin is the only Han dynasty. It has never changed. It has no influence from they call the barbarian, but the other minority. So this is very important. This is my article. I'm writing this. So this is generated my thinking about this. Maybe we have a chance, maybe in the future, we discuss this very complicated issue. So today we just focus on the organology aspect of the Guqin. So I just come back to my question that Dr. Tsai, can you let us know, did you find anything like that, the acquisition of the museum for this very ancient instrument?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Yu, raising a lot of issues, questions. To get to the point of catalog first, we can actually see that on the displays, the text descriptions on the chain has been kept to minimum. So here you see only less than 100 words about individual instruments. This is a new ways that museums, instead of giving one article to read, nobody actually have time to read in a museum. People pay attention to the object and also the dialogues of arrangement that curator try to produce through the display of the object. But at the same time, Met, for example, have a very good public website providing basic categorical informations of the instruments and even the measurements of the instruments, the inscription of the instruments. Sorry, the internet is a bit slow, but if you log into Met Museum, you will find arts, the Met collection. They have a wonderful website of telling of these instruments. And this instrument, of course, received a lot of attention, and curator over the past decades have tried to come up with as much information as possible and make it available online. And some of these high definition, photographs are also downloadable for free. So this is what Met had tried to do. And also they link, tell you, when this instrument was displayed in which year, which exhibitions. So they give you a lot of information, including the YouTube example that you actually saw someone play these instruments. So they make it public, accessible, and free. So that's the public information. But in terms of internal information, there are a lot of questions that not making it public. This instrument, for example, has been CAT scan and also have X-ray information that's actually not available because this image require interpretation, and they don't want people to interpret without having the knowledge. But they welcome scholars to make appointments to come and see their internal catalog. For example, I'm in the process of making a report, and I have a lot of view about this instrument as well, and I will make it internal just for the curator to see. So yes, they try to do the best they can. And Met Museum is very interesting that they used to have 3 curators, one Western European and one American, and one ethnomusicology. But ethnomusicology curators can't more retire, and they haven't been able to hire another curator at the moment, because we all know that it's getting harder and harder after COVID to get the funding to pay for all these beautiful luxury positions. Yes, in terms of the catalog, yes, they do have, and they tried their best. And for example, every year they have a Met fellows like me coming with special knowledge about certain instruments, and I will provide feedbacks I possibly can during that 1 year. And some of this exhibition, for example, here I personally involved of making decision and also making arrangement. Use this J chime as an example. This particular J chime is earlier Qing Dynasty one. Originally, their plan is to put up another bigger piece of J chime made in the Qianlong Emperor era. But when I saw that instrument, I have a question about the authenticity and the quality of the instruments. And I start doing some more research, compare with their J chime of Qianlong Emperor with the palace, with the National Museum in Beijing, and also compare with the Norton Museums in Florida. And I identified the museum J chime made in Qianlong Emperor era was not the best quality one. But so they listened to my advice and they listened to my report and my comparison and study, and they decided to take my recommendation to put up another more authentic instrument, not as big, not as extravagant, but this is definitely much better. So they did take up, a fellowship like me, who have this knowledge about Chinese or East Asian musical cultures. This is another example. When I was correcting their text descriptions, the old description was, oh, the Kamungo was from China, oh, the Hagen was from China, oh, the Yangqing was from China, and everything was from China. I said, well, you can't do that, and there's no point to say everything is from China in the context of Korean. So I say, how about we actually create kind of mirroring effects, right? It's kind of mirroring that people know the connection there. They know, obviously, there's a very close connection there, and we don't make Korean visitors being offended by being their musical instruments were from China originally. Yes, so yes, that was my role as a fellow. I didn't tell them just the things they wanted to hear. I was there like a scholar, independent scholars, and they did take my advices and suggestions very serious. So I had a great time. Not to mention, I have free unlimited gin and tonic when I was there for every opening, but that's another chat.
Great. That's a tricky question though. There's another question from anonymous the audience. Says, thank you for your comment, Professor Yu. For me, though I personally believe that innovation and creativity might be already included with Qin Dapu. So let me answer this question. So Dapu is very interesting, another process of Guqin creativity. And you know what, the Dapu, when I say it's not in creativity, it is discouraged. What I mean is composition, Guqin music composition. Basically, we don't see any successful Guqin composition in modern time. Dapu, you need based on the original notated tablet, which is at least maybe the 19th or before 19th century, probably. Your creativity is very limited. That is only the rhythm element. You can create your rhythm, but you cannot create anything. Create the technique. So Dapu is actually the translation for Dapu is also tricky. We call sometimes I would prefer like a reinterpretation. So that I translate that for reinterpretation. It's really a creativity. So that's what I mean for Dapu. But this is another big issue. But Guqin Da, what is Guqin Dapu, and what can be created, what cannot be created. So actually, one thing I want to put it, that is in 1980s or 1990s, when I was still working in the Shanghai Conservatory, when the Western modern music starting influence Chinese music composition. They have a group of people, including Professor Lin Yuren and some other very famous Qin players. They put together. They're trying to use Guqin as like a experimental instrument, creating this like a Western modern music. I still have the video. It's very interesting though. They try to use the Guqin to create modern music. It's not a really traditional Chinese music. This is a very interesting period, and they did that. Unfortunately, none of this accepted by the modern Guqin players. But this is you know what? Another thing is the concept of Guqin. They're very similar. The Guqin emphasizes the sound. Very important. The Guqin, each note can produce different sound. And another thing between the music and the culture is that the sound, Guqin sound is very unique. That is my research area. That's the temperament. It uses just the intonation. It's very natural. That's why Guqin is very related to Taoism, philosophy, because the music, the sound is very, very, very different, very unique. I think probably one of very few, probably one of the only major instrument using the major string instrument using just intonation, which is really natural temperament. Any? Okay, maybe I said too much. Any other questions?
I just like to have a dialogue with Professor Yu, and I think that also related to some of these questions about whether we should play the same or not the same. For me, I played Qing when I was a university student. So in the process of learning, I actually pay attention to the notation, and I pay attention to the recording, how my teachers play, and also his fingering technique. But now, when I play the piece, I don't look at the notation, and I don't care whether it's the same as my teacher, or whether I get rid of section 2 and jump to section 3. It's become less important to me who are playing this instrument. And also for Qing notation, there are many additions, a bit like Mozart, for example. There's not only one publisher published one edition. A piece kind of like Liu Shui, we have more than 20 different versions of different temperature notation. So yes, if you stick with the notation itself as scholars, yes, there's not much freedom. But if you play Qing as a player, you have the cosmos of freedom that you can do whatever you like to do. Thank you very much.
So actually, we have run out of time for the previous scheduled length. If we don't have any big questions, we probably have to stop here. Then we maybe have another opportunity in the future.
Oh yeah, I do have one thing to mention. Someone asked about whether new pieces exist. Yes, new pieces exist. For example, this is the book that I worked together with Peng Lijun and also Paul Clark from New Zealand. In this book, I have written one chapter about Guqing during the Cultural Revolutions. They were zither reform committee have been formed by the government of the time to create a new pieces for the Qing, and also create a modern instrument that can be accessible to workers, soldiers, and farmers. And there you will find your answer. Please go and read the chapter if you like. A modern composer, yes, there are some, but however, Qing is quite unique. Today, although Western classical music have early music movement, but early music never been kind of major mainstream genres in Western Conservatorium. But Qing, however, is kind of similar to Western early music movement, but those conservatoriums where Qing was taught, the traditional repertoires are the major repertoires. There are some modern repertoires included as part of conservatorium teaching, but most of these pieces are traditional. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So maybe we have to stop here. Then we are looking forward in the future opportunities. Thank you, Dr. Han. Thanks, Nick. Thank you, everybody attending this very interesting, very great lecture. So we'll see you next time. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Yu.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. It has made me think of the tune in quite a different way. And it was such a privilege to look at the underside of some of the tunes. It's quite voyeuristic in a way. But as we've run out of time, I would like to thank everyone, all our colleagues and friends from the local university community at WSU, at Sydney Con in China. And we also have Dr. Andre Ribeiro from as far as Brazil. So thank you for coming and for your excellent questions. Dr. Kirsty Gillespie. She'll be talking about her work in Papua New Guinea and perhaps touch on the Chinese community there. So we wish you a safe and restful holiday season, and we'll see you next year. Thank you.